Okay. It was around here somewhere, and I have too many papers tonight, so it's either in the conference room in there or here, but we'll move along. I do have that answers on the screen, but I had some other notes on there too, but that just means I'll skip over those and we may move quicker. So, so this is, I forget what week of November this is, but looking ahead, it hit me this morning, or middle of the night, one of the two, that next week we have Paul Gerber, one of our missionaries, will be actually going to speak to this class in here next week, and he'll be visiting in town. So while we have him available, we'll get an update from him in this class next week. And then the week of Thanksgiving, we're going to have a special prayer service, devotional with everyone in here in the auditorium. So while I have my lesson prepared for this week, it hit me this morning that, this is the last week that I'm going to be able to teach. So I jumped back in there and added a few things on chapter 23 and 24. What I was intending to do originally was spend a whole week on 23 and 24. But at the same time, I think you're probably most familiar with 23 and 24. So we'll just kind of do a summary tonight. So my goal tonight is to actually move pretty quickly from Joshua chapter 16 and through 24. And basically most of these chapters, with the exception of 22, 23, and 24, we're basically going to draw one lesson from that section or that chapter. And so we'll kind of move quickly through some of these, and I'm not trying to minimize those things, but you'll see why we'll spend a little bit more time on a few of the chapters than other. But just a reminder that what we're looking at here is kind of a summary of how they've divided the land, how they've conquered the land. Last week we kind of ended with looking at Caleb and how he said, I'm 85 years old, but I'm just as strong today, and I'm good for warring and for going out and coming back in. Now, therefore, give me this mountain. And he demanded the mountain where the Anakim, where the giants lived, and they drove them out. And that was part of the inheritance there. So that brings us to chapter 16. And 16 is basically dividing up the land for Ephraim and Manasseh, and it kind of talks through the boundaries there. And I won't take us through all the verses, but I do want to draw your attention to verse 10. In this area it says, however, they did not drive out the Canaanites who lived in Gezer. So the Canaanites have lived in the midst of Ephraim to this day, but have made to do forced labor. So we've seen this sprinkled through there a couple times where they have not forced all, they have not destroyed all the Canaanites. They have not drove out all of the people. And we see this even addressed a little bit later in the book of Joshua. Here we'll see that in a little bit. But the lesson that I wanted to bring to our attention is what of God's will are we refraining from doing in our lives? Is there something that we know we should do, that we know we should take care of, and we're not? And that's a personal question, and that is something that we need to ask ourselves. Is there something that we need to take care of? And the only way to handle it is to take care of it, to do that. Just like the Canaanites ended up being a thorn in the Israelites' side, some of these people that they did not drive out ended up later, generations later, being a problem. If we're not careful in our lives, the things that we're delaying from taking care of, they will come back to bite us as well. They'll end up being a problem later. If we're not careful, it'll also affect our children. All right, chapter 17, we find that there's some of the people of Joseph that complain about their allotment. Can you imagine that? Someone complain about their inheritance, basically. Complain about their allotment. Let's look at verses 14 through 18. Then the people of Joseph spoke to Joshua, saying, "Why have you given me but one lot and one portion as an inheritance, so I am a numerous people, since all along the Lord has blessed me?" It's just funny how that's worded. God has blessed me with all these people, so why have you not given me more land? Basically. Notice verse 15. And Joshua said to them, "If you are a numerous people, go up by yourselves to the forest, and there clear ground for yourselves in the name of the Perizzites and the Rephaim, since the hill country of Ephraim is too narrow for you." The people of Joseph said, "The hill country is not enough for us. Yet all the Canaanites who dwell in the plain have chariots of iron, both those in Bethshan and its villages, and in the valley of Jezreel." Then Joshua said to the house of Joseph, to Ephraim and Manasseh, "You are a numerous people and have great power. You shall not have one allotment only, but the hill country shall be yours. For though it is a forest, you shall clear it and possess it to the farthest borders, for you shall drive out the Canaanites, though they have chariots of iron, and though they are strong." So it's interesting how Joshua responds here, uses some wisdom. He kind of takes their words and puts it back on them a little bit. He basically said, well, you can have this country. You can clear out the forest and you'll have more land. And they said, well, the people have chariots of iron. He says, well, you have more people, you can drive them out. And so the lesson that I put down on here, sometimes growth can present challenges, but also growth creates more hands to handle the challenges. And that's basically what Joshua was stating here. Okay, yes, you do have more people, but because you have more people, you can clear out the forest and you can drive out the people. So you handle this area. And so it's certainly a lesson for us to learn, and even a particular time where we are here at Lehman, that growth can present challenges. I think we see that in the New Testament. But it also means that there's more hands there that can put a hand to the plow, if you will, and get the job done. All right, chapter 18 is the allotment of the remaining land. And just want to go through verses 1 through 6 real quick. Then the whole congregation of the people assembled at Shiloh and set up a tent of meeting there. The land lay subdued before them. There remained among the people of Israel 7 tribes whose inheritance had not yet been apportioned. So Joshua said to the people of Israel, "How long will you put off going in to take possession of the land which the Lord, the God of your fathers, have given you? Provide 3 men from each tribe, and I will send them out, that they may set out and go up and down the land. They shall write a description of it with a view to their inheritances, and then come to me. They shall divide it into 7 portions." And he talks about how they should describe it and divide it. So the question is, he basically asked, how long will you put off, there in verse 3, how long will you put off going in to take possession of the land which the Lord, the God of your fathers, has given you? I think I mentioned to you before that my grandfather once saying, I don't know why I remember these sayings of his. I could tell you all kinds of sayings of his. But he said one, don't put off till tomorrow what you can do today. Save it for next week. But we cannot procrastinate in doing what we should. We must be people of action. And this is what Joshua is telling them and encouraging them to do. Here they've conquered the land. The land was subdued, but they were just stuck in the same place. They hadn't taken inheritance of where they were. They were in their comfort zone, and they did not want to leave there. So that's a lesson that we can learn there from chapter 18. And basically, the rest of the chapter talks about how they divided up the land. So let's look at 19. 19 is Joshua's inheritance. So the first part of the chapter talks about Simeon and Zebulun, the division there. Then Issachar and Asher and Naphtali, the inheritance of those, and Dan. And it brings us all the way, notice verse 49. Verse 49, when they had finished distributing the several territories of the land as inheritances, the people of Israel gave an inheritance among them to Joshua the son of Nun. By command of the Lord, they gave him the city that he asked, Timnath-Serah in the hill country of Ephraim, and he rebuilt the city and settled in it. These are the inheritances that Eleazar the priest and Joshua the son of Nun and the heads of the fathers' houses of the tribes of the people of Israel distributed by lot at Shiloh before the Lord at the entrance of the tent of meeting. So they finished dividing the land. So notice, who was it that got their inheritance last? Joshua. And I think that's a lesson for us to learn. Sometimes leadership sometimes demands that personal blessings come last. And I think Joshua, throughout the book of Joshua, if you like studying leadership, just look at the little things that Joshua did. And there's a lot of little things that he did that are good examples for leaders. And, he made sure everybody else got the inheritance that they did. But notice, which place did he get? The one he asked for. And the people made sure they had that. Yes, Gary? They had. I think they had driven out all of those. There were pockets here and there that they did not drive out. But the last group that was the significant group to drive out, I believe, were the Anakim, the giants there that they drove out. But sometimes the way the book of Joshua is written, it's hard to kind of follow that and see that. So he kind of covers different topics at different ones, and really chapters 16 through 20 really kind of talk about the division, how they divided out and where the boundaries of each tribe were. I think that served a purpose. We know that those boundaries, they held true for a long, long time, and that was those tribes' strict boundaries there. All right, chapter 20, the cities of refuge. This was an interesting concept, and that was emphasized here. Lord said to Joshua, say to the people of Israel, appoint the cities of refuge of which I spoke to you through Moses. And this is the purpose of the cities of refuge, that the manslayer who strikes any person without intent or unknowingly may flee there. They shall be for you a refuge from the avenger of blood. He shall flee to one of these cities and shall stand at the entrance of the gate of the city and explain his case to the elders of that city. Then they shall take him into the city and give him a place, and he shall remain with them. And if the avenger of blood pursues him, they shall not give up the manslayer into his hand, because he struck his neighbor unknowingly and did not hate him in the past. And he shall remain in that city until he has stood before the congregation for judgment, until the death of him who is the high priest at the time. Then the manslayer may return to his own town and his own home, to the town from which he fled. So this was part of the provisions that they established these things. And if you notice verse 9, these were the cities designated for all the people of Israel and for the strangers sojourning among them, that anyone who killed a person without intent could flee there, so they might not die by the hand of the avenger of blood till he stood before the congregation. So there were provisions for non-intentional offenders to stay until they stood judgment. This was not to say that they wouldn't have to stand judgment, that these cities of refuge were there where they could just be free and not have to stand judgment, but they could go there until that time where they did stand judgment. I think there's been some false impressions about cities of refuge throughout time, and there's been this thought of some cities of refuge that have been, I guess you could say, twisted from the original purpose that we see here of what they were designed to be. All right, chapter 21, the promise keeper. Chapter 21 mainly divides out the allotment to the children, to the tribe of Levi. And remember, they didn't have a separate, their own area, but they did have certain cities that they could dwell. And so basically, with each area and territory, they had certain cities where they could keep their livestock and that sort of thing, with different pasturelands. So you see that mentioned. But the point I wanted to bring to your attention is verses 43 through 45. Thus the Lord gave to Israel all the land they swore to give to their fathers, and they took possession of it, and they settled there. And the Lord gave them rest on every side, just as he had sworn to their fathers. Not one of all their enemies had withstood them, for the Lord had given all their enemies into their hands. Not one word of all the good promises that the Lord had made to the house of Israel had failed. All had came to pass. So there's several key themes in the book of Joshua. One is the idea of be strong and courageous. But another theme throughout the book of Joshua is that God keeps his promises. He delivers on everything that he says to do. And we see how time after time, God would say, I'm going to do this. And he would do it. And Joshua would say, see, he did it, just as he promised. Or just as Moses told us, just as God told Moses, he did these things. But it's spelled out here a couple times in these last couple chapters. But 43 through 45 is very powerful. And it tells us that God is the ultimate promise keeper. If we don't remember anything else about the book of Joshua, I hope that we walk away with that concept, that God is the ultimate promise keeper. if he says something, he's going to follow through with it. So any of the promises that we see concerning our lives, we can bank on it, that God is going to follow through on those promises. And when we have doubts and fears, those doubts and fears are based on experiences we've had with other people, with other humans, or even sometimes when we fail to live up to our expectations or expectations that others have of us. But one person that always follows through with their promises is God. And we can bank on that every time. Not one word was not followed through. And we can bank on that. All right. Chapter 22 is the eastern tribes return home. Remember, there's the Reubenites, the Gadites, and half the tribe of Manasseh. Remember, they kind of liked being on the other side of Jordan. And they were told, okay, you can possess that land, but you've got to fight for the rest of the tribes first, and then you can return. So now that land is subdued, they fought for it, and they can return. And so notice verse 2. Joshua calls them in and says, you have kept all that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, and have obeyed my voice in all that I've commanded you. You have not forsaken your brothers these many days, down to this day, but have been careful to keep the charge of the Lord your God. And now the Lord your God has given rest to your brothers as he promised them. Therefore, turn and go to your tents in the land where your possession lies. He does a reminder, verse 5, only be careful to observe the commandment of the law that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, to love the Lord your God, and to walk in all of his ways, to keep his commandments, and to cling to him, and to serve them with all your heart, with all your soul. So one thought here, we see that they are rewarded for keeping their commitment. It's a lesson to us that God will reward us if we also keep our commitment. Again, this is one of those rewards that they had. But then something happens. They're going to go back across the Jordan, and they're going to go to the other side. And what happens when they go to the other side, verse 10, we see that they built an altar by the Jordan, an altar of imposing side. Now, if you remember, on the side of Jordan that they were on, the side of Jericho, the side that all these lands were conquered recently, they had the stones, right, that were a remembrance of what God had done. So they go back across the Jordan. When they go back across the Jordan, they build an altar on the other side. And they build this of imposing side. And we find later that it's actually basically a copy of the altar of the Lord, but it's bigger. It's basically imposing sides. And there's these rumors that pop up with the other tribes. They wonder what's going on. And they basically, notice verse 12, when the people of Israel heard it, the whole assembly of the people of Israel gathered at Shiloh to make war against them. They're ready to go to battle because they built this altar. And they were worried about what they are doing, that they're falling away from God. But notice what they did. They came to the people of Reuben, people of Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh and the land of Gilead, and they said to them, and they basically said, what have you done? You've breached this, you're not following God's word, basically. And why are you doing this? But we see the response. Notice verse 22. The mighty one, the God the Lord, the mighty one, God the Lord, he knows, and let Israel itself know. If it was in rebellion or breach of faith against the Lord, do not spare us today for building an altar to turn away from following the Lord. Or if we did so, to offer burnt offerings or grain offerings or peace offerings on it. May the Lord himself take vengeance. No, but we did it from fear, that in time to come, your children might say to our children, what have you to do with the Lord, the God of Israel? For the Lord has made the Jordan a boundary between you and us. You, the people of Reuben, the people of Gad, you have no portion in the Lord, so your children might make our children cease to worship the Lord. Therefore we said, let us now build an altar, not for burnt offering nor for sacrifice, but to be a witness between us and you, between our generations after us, that we do perform the service of the Lord in his presence with our burnt offerings and sacrifices and peace offerings. So your children will not say to our children in time to come, you had no portion in the Lord. So they explained why they did this. They did this as to be a witness between the two sides of the Jordan from the children of Israel. And what was the response? In verse 31, then when the Phinehas, the son of Eleazar the priest, said to the people of Reuben and the people of Gad and the people of Manasseh, today we know that the Lord is in our midst, because you have not committed this breach of faith against the Lord. So the other lesson for us, to me, is always go directly to the source to verify information. They got stirred up. They were ready to attack because they thought they were offering sacrifices on this altar that was not authorized. But what they were doing is really building a memorial there on both sides of the Jordan River, and it was a witness there. And so once this was explained, everything was okay. Well, that brings us to Joshua 23 and 24, and this is probably the part that is most familiar to you and to all of us, and probably one of the parts that we probably hear more in sermons, but certainly one of the most powerful. When we started this study at the start of Joshua, we talked about how Moses, before he died, he gathered all the people together and basically presented Joshua as the leader. But in his final course, I guess, his final speech before he died, Moses told them several things before they went into the occupy the land. And he encouraged them to be strong and courageous, to always follow the Lord. And so here we see in chapters 23 and 24, Joshua is basically doing the same thing. Now remember last week we talked about God told Joshua, you're old and you're advanced in years, but there's still work to be done. Now, we weren't told exactly how old Joshua was, but let's say he was around the age of Caleb. That would have put him around 85, somewhere around there. And some of you that have dug into this deeper, we could find other passages that would verify that age, but somewhere around that. So then all this work got done. So now notice the Bible, what is said here. Chapter 23, a long time afterward, when the Lord had given rest to Israel from all the surrounding enemies, and Joshua was old and well advanced in years, Joshua summoned all Israel, its elders and its heads, its judges and officers, and said to them, I am now old and well advanced in years. Not to get hung up on age, but flip over to chapter 24, notice verse 29. After these things, Joshua, son of Nun, servant of the Lord, died, being 110. So sometime between 80-something and now he's 110. They accomplished all those things. But I've had a little, it appears here that there's two messages. One to the leaders. They summoned all Israel, verse 2 of chapter 23. All Israel, its elders and heads, its judges and officers, and said to them these things. And then in chapter 24 we find, verse 1, Joshua gathered all the tribes of Israel to Shechem and summoned the elders, the heads, the judges, and the officers of Israel. It's possible that there were two discourses, one to the leaders and then one to everybody. We do know in chapter 24 that second one was to everybody, and it was to the people of Shechem. We're told that very clearly. We do know that the elders, the heads, the judges, officers, they were in both sessions. We do know that. But it could have been that there's sometimes Joshua, when he writes, he tells you one thing and then he tells it again, but elaborates a little bit more. Does anyone have further study or more insight on that? I don't know that it necessarily matters. We know what he said here, and we know what was said on both occasions. There's a lot of similarity in both messages here that are listed. So let me point out the high points. We won't read everything. It is very powerful, and I encourage you to read it all. But let's notice a few things I may jump around. He says in verse 3, "And you have seen all that the Lord your God has done to all these nations for your sake. For it is the Lord your God who has fought for you." And to me, that's powerful. And I hope we let our kids know, and I hope we acknowledge and just reflect all what God has done for us. I believe that many times we're not fully aware of all that God has done. But we should give God all the credit for everything that's been done in our lives and give him the glory for all those things. He's certainly given us any ability that we have and any opportunity that we have. But we really don't know what all he's done. But he tells the Israelites what he has done here. So he says, you've seen all that's been done. So he's allotted this inheritance to them. In verse 6, "Therefore be very strong to keep and to do all that is written in the book of the law of Moses, turning aside from it neither to the right hand nor to the left, that you may not mix with these nations remaining among you." So Gary, this speaks to that point just a little bit. He acknowledges, okay, there's some of these people we didn't drive out, but he's telling them, don't turn aside from God's word to the right or left, that you may not mix with these nations remaining among you, or make mentions of the names of their gods, or swear by them, or serve them, or bow down to them. But you shall cling to the Lord your God, just as you have done so this day. For the Lord has driven out from before you great and strong nations. And as for you, no man has been able to stand before you to this day. One man of you puts to flight 1,000, since it is the Lord your God who fights for you, just as he promised you. Be very careful, therefore, to love the Lord your God. So what's the response? He tells them, hey, you've seen what God's done. He's given you all this land, all this mighty land, and the God has fought for you. So remember that, and what's the response? What does he tell them to do? There in verse 11. Be careful, very careful to love him. So what did Jesus say? If you love me, what? you keep my commandments. And that's basically the same message that he's telling them here. Be careful to follow all that's in the book of the law. Don't depart from it, right or left hand there, verse 6. Cling to the Lord, verse 8. Be careful, therefore, to love the Lord your God. Notice verse 14. And now I'm about to go the way of all the earth. I've heard Jack Ray probably say that every time we talk about someone passing, he'll refer to this passage. Well, it's the way of all the earth, we're told. And yes, it's the point of man wants to die. That's the way of all the earth, unless the Lord returns before it happens to us. That's the way of all the earth. But here's Joshua. He knows he's about to die. So what is he telling the children of Israel here? I'm about to go the way of all the earth, and you know in your hearts and souls, all of you, that not one word has failed of all the good things that the Lord your God has promised concerning you. All have come to pass for you. Not one of them has failed. I'll go on verse 15, 16. But just as all the good things that the Lord your God promised concerning you have been fulfilled for you, so the Lord will bring upon you all the evil things until he's destroyed you from off this good land that the Lord your God has given you, if you transgress the covenant of the Lord your God, which he commanded you, and go and serve other gods and bow down to them. Then the anger of the Lord will be kindled against you, and you shall perish quickly from off the good land that he has given to you. So he reminds them, God has done all this to you, for you. He has fought for you. He's given you all these things. He's just telling them, be careful to love God and follow his word. And if you don't, and just as he's given you all these good things, he's also could drive you from these things if you don't follow him. So then he gathers all the children of Israel in chapter 24, and he says this speech to all of them, and he summons all the people, and I could probably read it better than I can explain it. So let's just start with verse 2. Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, long ago your fathers lived beyond the Euphrates, Terah, the father of Abraham and of Nahor, and they served other gods. Then I took your father Abraham from beyond the river and led him through all the land of Canaan and made his offspring many. I gave him Isaac, and to Isaac I gave Jacob and Esau, and I gave Esau the hill country of Seir to possess. But Jacob and his children went down to Egypt. And I sent Moses and Aaron, and I plagued Egypt with what I did in the midst of it, and afterward I brought you out. Then I brought your fathers out of Egypt, and you came to the sea, and the Egyptians pursued your fathers with chariots and horsemen to the Red Sea. And when they cried to the Lord, he put darkness between you and the Egyptians and made the sea come upon them and cover them, and your eyes saw what I did in Egypt. And you lived in the wilderness a long time. So he gives them this summary of basically Abraham to current. In verse 8, then I brought you to the land of the Amorites, who lived on the other side of the Jordan. They fought with you, and I gave them into your hand, and you took possession of their land, and I destroyed them before you. Then Balak, the son of Zippor, the king of Moab, arose and fought against Israel, and he sent and invited Balaam, the son of Beor, to curse you. But I would not listen to Balaam. Indeed, he blessed you, so I delivered you out of his hand. And you went over the Jordan and came to Jericho, and the leaders of Jericho fought against you, and also the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, and I gave them into your hand. And I sent the hornet before you. that's always caught my eye. I went to Hatton High School in North Alabama. We were the Hornets. It's one of the few times in the Bible the Hornets were mentioned there. But God says, and I sent the hornet before you, which drove them out before you, the two kings of the Amorites. It was not by your sword or by your bow. And this is a key verse, and we've mentioned this several times throughout sermons and things. I gave you a land on which you had not labored, in cities that you had not built, and you dwelt in them. You eat of the fruit of vineyards and olive orchards that you did not plant. Basically, God blessed them. This gets down to the part where we're more familiar. Than now, therefore, fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and faithfulness. Put away the gods of your fathers, that your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. And if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods of your fathers served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. So we see that passage, we refer to it many times, but you see the context of this passage. That they've done all this through the life of Joshua. They've conquered all these things. This is not Joshua as a young man saying, okay, me and my kids, we're going to serve the Lord. This is at the end of his life, and this is before he passes away. But he's telling them, God has done all these things, but you have a choice. But as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. So then there's three responses. Verse 16, then the people answered, far be it from us that we should forsake the Lord to serve other gods. Verse 18, therefore we also will serve the Lord, for he is our God. And Joshua said, verse 19, you are not able to serve the Lord, for he is a holy God. He's a jealous God. He will not forgive your transgressions or your sins if you forsake the Lord and serve foreign gods. Then he will turn and do you harm and consume you after having done you good. Notice what they said the second time. Verse 21, no, but we will serve the Lord. Joshua said again, you are witnesses against yourselves that you have chosen the Lord to serve him. And they said, we are witnesses. He said, then put away the foreign gods that are among you and incline your heart to the Lord, the God of Israel. And the third time, verse 24, the people said to Joshua, the Lord our God we will serve, and his voice we will obey. So they made this statement three times. And what was the end result? Notice verse 31. Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua and had known all the work that the God did for Israel. So a couple lessons for us just as we close. We also must choose. We have a choice to make. And we must not forget God's blessings in our lives. And where that came from is he was telling them, don't forget all these things that God has done for you. Remember God. And they did. They did throughout their lives. Throughout this generation, they did do those things. Later we see in the book of Judges that they then forgot those blessings. They forgot what God had done, and each man did what was right in their own eyes. But during this time frame, they did follow God. I've enjoyed this study in Joshua. I hope you have too. I apologize for kind of rushing through this end. But it is a book that is encouraging to me. My little Bible cover is Joshua 1:9, be strong and courageous. And it's just one of those inspiring books to me. And I think the more we study it, we can see how God fulfills his promises. And I hope you've seen that in your life and that you stop and reflect on that. Let's bow for a word of prayer as we close. Dear Father in heaven, as we come to you, we thank you for all the blessings that you've given us, that you give us daily, even the things that we take for granted so easily. Dear Father, help us to never forget that you are the holy God, that you desire us to worship you. And dear Father, help us in our lives to choose for ourselves, for our families, to serve you. And give us the strength to do that. And it's through your Son's name that we pray. Amen. Thank you, and you're dismissed.